The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Sotheby's auction house in London, casting golden rays across the polished marble floors. Sarah Mitchell, the head of jewelry authentication, carefully lifted a velvet-lined box from the secure storage vault. Her hands trembled slightly as she gazed upon the contents. A magnificent sapphire and diamond necklace that hadn't been seen by the public for over 25 years. The necklace belonged to Princess Diana, and according to the records, it had mysteriously vanished from Kensington Palace just months before her tragic death in 1997. Now, decades later, it had surfaced in the most unexpected way possible. The story began 3 weeks earlier when Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, an elderly widow from Surrey, had contacted the auction house about selling some family jewelry. Eleanor explained that her late husband, James, had worked as a private security consultant for wealthy families throughout the 1990s. Among his personal effects, she discovered a small collection of jewelry that she didn't recognize. "I thought they were just costume pieces at first," Eleanor had told Sarah during their initial meeting. "But when I took them to a local jeweler for appraisal, he nearly fainted. He insisted I bring them to you immediately." Sarah remembered that conversation vividly as she examined each piece with her magnifying glass. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, and the hallmarks were unmistakable. These weren't just any royal jewels. They were some of Diana's most cherished pieces, items that had been reported missing and presumed lost forever. The collection included the sapphire necklace, a pair of emerald earrings that Diana had worn to numerous state dinners, and a delicate pearl bracelet that had been a wedding gift from the Spencer family. But the most shocking discovery was a handwritten note tucked beneath the jewelry box's velvet lining. The note, written in Diana's distinctive handwriting, read, "For safekeeping during troubled times. To be returned when the dust settles." Sarah's heart raced as she realized the implications. These pieces hadn't been stolen or lost, they had been deliberately hidden. But why? And why had James Hartwell, a security consultant, been entrusted with such precious items? As word of the discovery spread through Sotheby's, the atmosphere became electric with anticipation. The auction house's director, Charles Pemberton, immediately recognized the historical significance of the find. However, he also understood the delicate nature of the situation. These weren't just valuable jewelry pieces. They were intimate connections to one of the most beloved figures in modern British history. Charles decided to handle the matter with utmost discretion. He personally contacted Buckingham Palace to inform them of the discovery before any public announcement was made. The response was swift and unexpected. The palace requested a private viewing before deciding how to proceed. 2 days later, Prince William arrived at Sotheby's accompanied by his private secretary and a legal advisor. Sarah watched as the future king stood before the display case, his expression unreadable as he gazed upon his mother's jewelry. The room fell silent except for the gentle ticking of an antique clock on the wall. "I remember this necklace," William said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "She wore it to my school concert when I was 8 years old. I thought it made her look like a fairy tale princess." His fingers traced the air above the glass case, never quite touching the surface. "And these earrings, she was wearing them in one of the last photographs we took together." The legal advisor cleared his throat gently. "Your Highness, we need to discuss the legal implications. Mrs. Hartwell has clear legal title to these pieces based on her husband's possession and the note from your mother. However, given their historical significance," William held up his hand, stopping the man mid-sentence. "I understand the legal position. But this isn't just about law, it's about what my mother would have wanted." He turned to face Sarah and Charles. "Tell me about Mrs. Hartwell. What kind of woman is she?" Sarah smiled warmly. "She's remarkable, Your Highness. 83 years old, sharp as a tack, and incredibly gracious. She lost her husband last year and is struggling financially. The sale of this jewelry would allow her to remain in her family home and provide security for her remaining years. She could have sold them quietly through private dealers and made a fortune without anyone knowing their true provenance," Charles added. "Instead, she chose to do the right thing and bring them to us for proper authentication." William nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like to meet her." The meeting was arranged for the following afternoon. Eleanor Hartwell arrived dressed in her finest outfit, a navy blue dress that had seen better days but was immaculately maintained. She carried herself with dignity despite her obvious nervousness at meeting the prince. "Mrs. Hartwell," William said warmly, extending his hand. "Thank you for being so honest about these pieces. It would have been easy to dispose of them quietly." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Your Highness, I could never have done that. When I realized they belonged to your dear mother, I knew they needed to come home." They sat together in Sotheby's private consultation room, as Eleanor shared what she knew about her husband's connection to the jewelry. James had been hired by Diana in early 1997 to provide discreet security advice during a particularly difficult period. He had mentioned to Eleanor that the princess was concerned about the safety of certain personal items and had asked him to store them temporarily. "He never told me what they were," Eleanor explained. "James was always very professional about his work. It wasn't until after he passed that I found the box in his study, hidden behind his military medals." William listened intently, asking gentle questions about the timeline and circumstances. As Eleanor spoke, it became clear that Diana had been planning for various contingencies during the turbulent final months of her life. "She was such a lovely woman," Eleanor continued, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. "James only met her a few times, but he said she had the most caring nature. She insisted on making him tea herself during their meetings, even though she had staff for that." As the afternoon progressed, William found himself deeply moved by Eleanor's story and her character. Here was a woman who could have profited enormously from these jewels, but instead chose honesty and integrity. It reminded him powerfully of his mother's own values. The meeting concluded with William making an unexpected announcement that would set in motion a chain of events no one could have predicted. His decision would not only honor his mother's memory, but also create ripples throughout the royal family that would reach all the way to Queen Camilla herself. The announcement Prince William made that afternoon would echo through royal circles for weeks to come. Standing in the quiet consultation room at Sotheby's, with Eleanor Hartwell looking on with hopeful eyes, he declared his intention to purchase the entire collection himself at auction and then establish a foundation in his mother's name using the proceeds. "Mrs. Hartwell," William said, his voice filled with conviction, "these pieces deserve to be in the public eye, where people can appreciate both their beauty and their connection to my mother's legacy. I propose we allow the auction to proceed as planned, but I will be bidding to ensure they remain connected to her charitable work." Eleanor's face lit up with joy and relief. Not only would she receive the financial security she desperately needed, but the jewelry would serve a purpose that Diana herself would have approved of. The plan seemed perfect, until word reached the upper levels of the royal household. That evening, William returned to Adelaide Cottage, his residence on the Windsor estate, feeling satisfied with his decision. Catherine was waiting for him in the drawing room, having put the children to bed. She looked up from her book as he entered, immediately noticing the thoughtful expression on his face. "How did it go?" she asked, setting her book aside. "You look like you've made a big decision." William settled into the chair beside her and recounted the entire day, from examining the jewelry to meeting Eleanor Hartwell to his announcement about the auction. Catherine listened attentively, occasionally asking questions about details. "I think you're doing exactly what your mother would have wanted," Catherine said when he finished. "She always believed in using her platform to help others." "I hope so," William replied. "There's something else, though. I want to display the jewelry publicly before the auction. Let people see these pieces one more time and learn about the charitable foundation they'll help establish." It was a beautiful idea, one that honored Diana's memory while helping Eleanor and creating something positive from the discovery. However, not everyone in the family would view it so favorably. The next morning, William's private secretary, James Harrison, received an urgent call from Buckingham Palace. Queen Camilla's private secretary, Amanda Thornfield, requested an immediate meeting to discuss the jewelry situation. The tone was formal and slightly tense. The meeting took place that afternoon in one of the palace's smaller reception rooms. Amanda Thornfield, a sharp woman in her 50s who had served the royal household for over 15 years, sat across from James with a stack of legal documents beside her. "The Queen has serious concerns about Prince William's plan," Amanda began without preamble. "These jewelry pieces, regardless of how they came to be in Mrs. Hartwell's possession, are part of the royal collection. They should be returned to the Crown estate, not sold at public auction." James shifted uncomfortably. He had anticipated this conversation but hoped it wouldn't come so soon. With respect, Mrs. Thornfield, the legal position is quite clear. Princess Diana's personal jewelry was not part of the Crown estate. These pieces were her private property, and the note she left with them suggests she intended them to be kept safe until circumstances allowed for their return. Circumstances have changed considerably, Amanda replied coolly. Prince William may not fully understand the precedent he's setting. If royal jewelry can simply be hidden away and then sold decades later, what does that say about the security and continuity of the royal collection? The underlying concern wasn't really about legal precedent, though that was certainly part of it. Queen Camilla had spent years building her position and reputation within the royal family. The sudden reappearance of Diana's jewelry, with all the media attention and public sentiment it would generate, threatened to overshadow her own role once again. Amanda continued, "The Queen believes the appropriate course of action would be for Prince William to acquire the pieces privately and donate them to the royal collection. A quiet family matter handled with dignity and discretion. And Mrs. Hartwell?" James asked. "Would be compensated fairly for her honesty, of course, but without the spectacle of a public auction and the inevitable media circus that will follow." James promised to relay the message to Prince William, though he suspected what the response would be. William had spent his entire adult life trying to balance his duty to the crown with his desire to honor his mother's memory. This situation represented both of those impulses perfectly. That evening, William discussed the palace's concerns with Catherine over dinner. The children were staying at Catherine's parents' house for the weekend, giving them rare privacy to talk through the complicated situation. "They're worried about the media attention," William said, cutting into his roast chicken with more force than necessary. "Camilla thinks this will bring up old comparisons and overshadow her work." Catherine chose her words carefully. "I can understand her concern. The press does love to create drama around anything involving your mother's memory. But that's exactly why this is so important," William responded passionately. "For 25 years, people have wondered what happened to these pieces. Now we have a chance to turn their reappearance into something positive, a way to continue my mother's charitable work and help a deserving woman like Eleanor Hartwell." "What if you compromise?" Catherine suggested. "Perhaps the exhibition could focus more on the charitable foundation and less on the jewelry itself. Make it clear that this is about continuing your mother's legacy of helping others." William considered this idea. It had merit, but he knew it wouldn't address the fundamental concern. The very existence of Diana's jewelry in public view would generate the kind of attention that made Camilla uncomfortable. Over the next few days, the tension escalated. Newspaper reports began appearing about the discovery, though details were limited. The headlines were exactly what the palace had feared: Diana's lost treasures found, Princess's secret jewelry cache discovered, and Diana's hidden legacy revealed. The stories, while factual, carried an undercurrent of mystery and intrigue that the royal family had worked hard to move beyond. Social media exploded with theories about why Diana had hidden the jewelry and what it meant that they were only now coming to light. Queen Camilla found herself in an increasingly difficult position. As the current queen consort, she had worked tirelessly to establish her own charitable initiatives and public role. The constant comparisons to Diana, which had plagued her for decades, seemed ready to resurface with renewed intensity. During their weekly meeting, King Charles expressed his own concerns to William. The conversation took place in his private study at Clarence House, surrounded by the watercolor paintings that had become his passion in recent years. "I understand your desire to honor your mother," Charles said carefully, "but we must also consider the impact on the institution and on Camilla. She's worked so hard to build her own place in the public's affections." William listened respectfully but remained unmoved. "Father, this isn't about competing with anyone's legacy. It's about doing right by Mrs. Hartwell and using Mother's jewelry to help people, just as she would have wanted." "Perhaps," Charles replied, "but perception matters as much as intention in our position. The public and the press won't necessarily see the nuance you're hoping for." As the debate continued within the family, Eleanor Hartwell remained blissfully unaware of the controversy her discovery had triggered. She spent her days in her small Surrey cottage, occasionally receiving calls from auction house representatives updating her on the process. Sarah Mitchell from Sotheby's had become a regular visitor, helping Eleanor understand the auction process and the incredible interest the jewelry was generating. During one such visit, Eleanor mentioned something that would add another layer of complexity to an already complicated situation. "You know, dear," Eleanor said as they sat in her modest living room, "James did mention one other thing about Princess Diana. He said she had asked him to make sure the jewelry went to the right hands when the time was right." "I always wondered what she meant by that." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Did he say anything else about what constituted the right hands?" Eleanor thought for a moment. "He mentioned something about her wanting them to help people who truly needed it, not just collectors or museums. She was very specific that they shouldn't become mere display pieces. This revelation would prove crucial in the coming days, as it provided additional insight into Diana's intentions. It also gave William even more reason to proceed with his original plan, regardless of the family pressure mounting against him. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test family loyalties, challenge royal protocol, and ultimately determine how Diana's final gift to the world would be handled. The confrontation that had been brewing for days finally erupted during what should have been a routine family gathering at Windsor Castle. It was a Sunday afternoon in late October, and the family had gathered for their traditional weekend lunch. The dining room, with its portraits of long-dead monarchs gazing down from the walls, seemed to hold its breath as tension filled the air. Queen Camilla had requested that the jewelry matter be discussed openly. Believing that a frank family conversation would resolve the issue, she sat across from William, her posture perfectly composed, but her hands betrayed her nervousness as she occasionally smoothed the tablecloth. "William," Camilla began, her voice steady but firm, "I think it's time we address this situation directly. The media attention around these jewelry pieces is becoming overwhelming, and it's affecting all of us." King Charles shifted uncomfortably at the head of the table. He had hoped to avoid this direct confrontation, but Camilla had insisted it was necessary. Catherine sat beside William, her expression neutral but supportive. "I understand your concerns," William replied diplomatically, "but I believe we have an opportunity here to do something meaningful with these pieces. Mother would have wanted them to serve a purpose, not just disappear back into storage." "Your mother would have wanted what was best for the family and the institution," Camilla countered, her voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there moments before. "This public auction will only generate more speculation and comparison. It's not fair to any of us." The word comparison hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone at the table understood exactly what kind of comparisons Camilla was referring to. Despite her years of dedicated service and her marriage to Charles, she had never fully escaped the shadow of her predecessor. Catherine spoke up for the first time. "Perhaps there's a way to honor both perspectives. William wants to help Mrs. Hartwell and continue Diana's charitable work. Camilla is concerned about the media impact. Could we find a middle ground?" "The middle ground," Camilla said, setting down her wine glass with perhaps more force than necessary, "would be to handle this privately. William could purchase the pieces quietly, Mrs. Hartwell would be compensated, and we could all move forward without turning this into a media spectacle." William's jaw tightened. "With respect, stepmother, this isn't about avoiding media attention. It's about doing what's right. Eleanor Hartwell deserves the full value these pieces will bring at auction, and the public has a right to see them one more time before they're used to fund charitable work." The use of stepmother instead of Camilla's preferred queen was not lost on anyone. Charles cleared his throat, attempting to restore some formality to the discussion. "Son, we all admire your intentions," Charles said, "but we must consider the broader implications. The monarchy's stability depends on our ability to present a united front." "United in what?" William asked, his composure beginning to crack. "United in hiding away reminders of Mother's legacy? United in pretending that her jewelry should disappear into some vault where no one will ever see it again?" The accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth that everyone recognized. Despite the years that had passed, Diana's memory still had the power to overshadow present-day members of the royal family, particularly Camilla. "That's not what this is about," Camilla said, but her voice lacked conviction. "This is about what's appropriate and what serves the greater good of the family." "The greater good," William repeated, standing from his chair, "or your personal comfort." The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine reached for William's hand, trying to calm him, but he remained standing, King Charles looked stricken, caught between his wife and his son. "I think," Charles said slowly, "we all need to take some time to consider our positions." But William wasn't finished. The months of careful diplomacy and family loyalty had given way to something deeper, a son's determination to honor his mother's memory, regardless of the political cost. "I've been considering my position for weeks," William said, his voice steady but determined. "These jewelry pieces were hidden away by my mother during one of the most difficult periods of her life. She trusted them to someone she barely knew because she believed they would be kept safe until they could serve their proper purpose." He looked directly at Camilla. That purpose was never to make anyone comfortable. It was to help people who needed help, just as she did throughout her life. Camilla's composure finally cracked slightly. "And what about the people who are here now, William? What about those of us who have to live with the constant comparisons and the endless speculation? Don't we deserve some consideration?" It was the most honest thing she had said during the entire conversation. The raw vulnerability in her voice surprised everyone, including herself. For just a moment the Queen's mask slipped, revealing the woman underneath who had spent decades trying to find her place in a story that had been written before she arrived. William's expression softened slightly, but his resolve remained firm. "I do consider that, and I'm sorry that this is difficult for you. But I can't make decisions about my mother's legacy based on other people's insecurities." The word insecurities landed like a physical blow. Camilla's face flushed and she stood abruptly from the table. "I think I've heard enough," she said, her voice now cold and formal. "Charles, I believe you need to decide where your loyalties lie, with your son's romantic notions or with the stability of your reign." She left the room without another word, her heels clicking sharply against the stone floors of the castle. The three remaining family members sat in uncomfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what had just transpired. Catherine was the first to speak. "That could have gone better." Despite the tension, William almost smiled at his wife's talent for understatement. "I didn't want it to escalate like that, but she needed to hear it." Charles rubbed his temples, looking every one of his 75 years. "Son, you're putting me in an impossible position. Camilla is my wife, but you're my heir. This family cannot function if we're at war with each other." "Then support what's right," William said, sitting back down beside Catherine. "Support Mrs. Hartwell's right to receive fair value for her honesty. Support the idea that mother's jewelry should help people instead of gathering dust. Support the notion that we can honor the past while building the future." "And if Camilla can't accept that?" William met his father's gaze steadily. "Then she'll have to decide what's more important, her personal comfort or doing what's right." The aftermath of the confrontation spread quickly through the royal household. Staff members who had overheard parts of the argument whispered among themselves, and within hours, coded messages were being passed between various private secretaries. Amanda Thornfield, Camilla's private secretary, immediately began damage control. She arranged private meetings with key media contacts, attempting to shape any potential coverage in Camilla's favor. The narrative she promoted focused on the Queen's dedication to duty and her concern for proper protocol. Meanwhile, William's team began preparing for what they now realized would be a very public battle. James Harrison reached out to constitutional lawyers, seeking advice on the prince's rights and responsibilities regarding his mother's personal property. Eleanor Hartwell, still unaware of the family drama her discovery had triggered, received a visit from Sarah Mitchell that evening. Sarah had been asked by Sotheby's management to ensure that Mrs. Hartwell was prepared for the increased attention the auction would generate. "I'm afraid things are becoming quite complicated," Sarah told Eleanor as they sat in the older woman's kitchen. "There's significant interest from various parties, and the media attention will likely be intense." Eleanor stirred her tea thoughtfully. "You know, dear, I've lived through a world war, raised 4 children on my own after my first husband died, and buried my second husband last year. I think I can handle some newspaper reporters." Her resilience impressed Sarah, but she felt obligated to prepare Eleanor for what was coming. "It might be more than just reporters. Mrs. Hartwell, this situation has implications for the royal family that go beyond the jewelry itself. Are you saying Prince William might not be able to bid at the auction?" "I'm saying there are forces working to prevent the auction from happening at all." Eleanor set down her teacup with determination. "Well then, those forces will just have to be disappointed." James entrusted me with these pieces, and Princess Diana entrusted them to him. I intend to honor both of their wishes, regardless of what anyone else thinks is convenient." As night fell over Britain, the battle lines were clearly drawn. On one side stood Prince William, supported by his wife and his conviction that his mother's legacy should be honored through charitable action. On the other side stood Queen Camilla, backed by centuries of royal protocol and a desperate desire to step out of Diana's shadow once and for all. King Charles found himself caught in the middle, forced to choose between his wife's happiness and his son's principles. The decision he would ultimately make would have consequences that none of them could fully anticipate. The week following the explosive family meeting at Windsor Castle marked a turning point in what had begun as a straightforward auction story. Behind the scenes, both sides of the royal family were mobilizing resources and allies in what was quickly becoming the most significant internal royal conflict in decades. Queen Camilla, still smarting from William's accusation about her insecurities, decided to take decisive action. She scheduled a series of private meetings with influential figures in British society, newspaper editors, prominent business leaders, and long-serving members of Parliament who had strong ties to the monarchy. Her first meeting was with Lord Pembroke, a distinguished member of the House of Lords who had served as an advisor to the royal family for over 30 years. They met in the private drawing room of Clarence House, away from the prying eyes of palace staff who might report back to other family members. "The situation has become untenable," Camilla explained to Lord Pembroke as they sat beside a crackling fireplace. "William believes he's honoring his mother's memory, but he's actually jeopardizing the stability of the institution." Lord Pembroke, a thoughtful man in his 70s with silver hair and keen blue eyes, listened carefully before responding. "What exactly are you asking of me, Your Majesty?"
"I need respected voices to explain why this auction is inappropriate."
"The jewelry belongs with the royal collection, not scattered to private collectors or turned into a media circus. And if Prince William proceeds despite opposition," Camilla's expression hardened, "then the public needs to understand the consequences of his choice." Meanwhile, William was building his own coalition of support. He reached out to his mother's former charities, many of which had struggled with funding cuts in recent years. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Here was an opportunity to revitalize Diana's charitable legacy in a very tangible way. Elton John, one of Diana's closest friends, agreed to publicly support the auction when contacted by William's team. "Diana would have loved this," he told James Harrison during a phone call. "She always believed in turning painful situations into opportunities to help others." The media, sensing a developing story with all the elements they loved, royalty, family drama, and Diana's enduring mystique, began digging deeper. Rebecca Thompson, a royal correspondent for The Times, had cultivated sources within the palace over her 15-year career. She started making calls. Her breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a junior member of Queen Camilla's staff who had overheard enough conversations to understand the scope of the conflict. Speaking on condition of anonymity, the staff member revealed that the Queen had been making private appeals to influential figures, asking them to oppose the auction. Rebecca's story, published on Wednesday morning, changed everything. Under the headline, "Palace Sources Queen Camilla Opposes Diana Jewelry Auction," the article detailed the behind-the-scenes maneuvering and quoted anonymous sources describing the tension within the royal family. The public reaction was swift and overwhelming. Social media exploded with commentary, and the vast majority sided with William. Diana's enduring popularity, combined with sympathy for Eleanor Hartwell's situation, created a groundswell of support for the auction. "Let the people see Diana's jewelry one more time," wrote one Twitter user whose post was shared thousands of times. "She belonged to all of us, not just the royal family." Another viral post read, "Camilla is threatened by a dead woman's jewelry? This tells us everything we need to know about her insecurity." The comments were harsh, and many crossed the line into personal attacks on Camilla. The very situation she had tried to avoid. Renewed comparisons to Diana and public criticism of her role was happening on a scale that exceeded her worst fears. King Charles watched the developing crisis with growing alarm. He summoned both William and Camilla to separate meetings at Buckingham Palace, hoping to find a resolution before the situation spiraled further out of control. His meeting with Camilla took place first, in his private study overlooking the palace gardens. She arrived looking composed but tired, the strain of the past week evident in her eyes. "The press coverage has been unfair," Charles said gently, taking her hand as they sat together on a sofa. "I'm sorry you're being subjected to this." "It's not the press coverage I'm worried about," Camilla replied, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. "It's what this means for our family unity. William is forcing us to choose sides. Perhaps there's still a way to find compromise. What if we supported the auction but ensured it was handled with appropriate dignity? No media circus, just a quiet sale with proceeds going to charity." Camilla shook her head. "It's gone too far for that now. Every article, every social media post, every news segment will compare me to her. Again. After all these years of building my own role, I'll be back to being the other woman, who's threatened by the saint's memory." Charles understood her pain, but he also recognized the impossible position his son was in. William genuinely believes he's doing what Diana would have wanted. "William is 41 years old," Camilla said with more sharpness than she intended. "At some point, he needs to stop making decisions based on what he thinks his mother would have wanted and start considering what's best for the family he's actually part of." The comment revealed the depth of Camilla's frustration. Despite being married to Charles for nearly 2 decades, she still sometimes felt like an outsider in a family defined by memories of Diana. Later that afternoon, Charles met with William in the same study. The contrast in their demeanor was stark. Where Camilla had seemed defensive and wounded, William appeared determined and energized. "Father, I've been thinking about something," William began before Charles could speak. "This controversy isn't really about jewelry or auctions. It's about whether we're going to let fear of difficult conversations prevent us from doing what's right." "Your stepmother is hurting," Charles said. "The public criticism has been quite harsh. I'm sorry about that, but I can't control what people say on social media. What I can control is honoring Mother's wishes and helping Mrs. Hartwell get fair value for her honesty." Charles studied his son's face, seeing echoes of both Diana's determination and his own stubbornness. "What would it take for you to consider a private sale instead?" "Nothing," William replied without hesitation. "This isn't a negotiation, Father. Mother left those pieces with clear instructions about helping people who truly needed it. Eleanor Hartwell needs it, and the charities that will benefit from the foundation need it. And if I ordered you to abandon this plan?" William met his father's gaze steadily. "Then you'd have to decide whether you want to be the king who forced his son to betray his mother's final wishes." The weight of that statement settled between them. Charles realized that this had evolved beyond a family disagreement into a test of principles that would define relationships for years to come. That evening, Eleanor Hartwell received an unexpected visitor at her Surrey cottage. Amanda Thornfield, Queen Camilla's private secretary, arrived unannounced just as Eleanor was finishing her dinner. "Mrs. Hartwell," Amanda said, settling into Eleanor's modest sitting room, "I represent Her Majesty Queen Camilla. I'd like to discuss a possible resolution to this situation that would benefit everyone involved." Eleanor, despite her age, was sharp enough to recognize a pressure visit when she saw one. "I'm listening, dear, but I should tell you that my mind is quite made up about the auction." Amanda smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The Queen is prepared to make a very generous offer for the jewelry pieces. More than you would likely receive at auction and without any of the stress or media attention." "How generous?" £2 million transferred immediately to your account. You would also receive recognition for your honesty and service to the crown." It was indeed a generous offer. More money than Eleanor could spend in her remaining years. For a moment she wavered. The media attention had been increasing, with reporters calling her phone and gathering outside her cottage. But then she remembered something her late husband James had told her about Princess Diana. She said the most important thing was that people remember her as someone who helped others, not someone who was helped by others. Eleanor looked at Amanda with clear, determined eyes. "I appreciate the Queen's offer, but I must decline. These pieces were meant to help people, and that's exactly what they're going to do." Amanda left the cottage empty-handed, but she wasn't finished yet. As she drove back toward London, she made a series of phone calls to contacts in the media. If Camilla couldn't stop the auction through private channels, perhaps public pressure could still accomplish what diplomatic means had failed to achieve. The battle for Diana's jewelry was entering its most intense phase, and the outcome would determine not just the fate of the precious pieces, but the future dynamics of the royal family itself. The revelation that would ultimately change everything came from the most unexpected source: Diana's former lady-in-waiting, Lady Sarah McCorquodale, Diana's older sister. She had remained largely silent about royal matters since Diana's death, but the escalating conflict over the jewelry finally compelled her to break her silence. Sarah contacted William directly, requesting a private meeting at Kensington Palace. When they met in the same drawing room where Diana had once entertained guests, Sarah carried with her a leather portfolio that she handled with obvious care. "William," she began, settling into a chair across from him, "I've watched this situation develop with growing concern. There are things about your mother's final months that I think you need to know." She opened the portfolio and withdrew several handwritten letters, all in Diana's distinctive script. "Your mother gave me these for safekeeping in July 1997, just 6 weeks before she died. She made me promise not to share them unless there was a compelling reason." William's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the letters. The first was dated June 15, 1997, and addressed to him and Harry, though they would have been too young to understand its contents at the time. "My dearest boys," the letter began, "I am writing this during a time of great uncertainty, not knowing what the future holds. There are people who would prefer that certain aspects of my life and my concerns remain hidden, but I believe you have a right to know the truth." The letter went on to detail Diana's growing fears about her safety and her decision to distribute certain personal possessions to trusted individuals for safekeeping. She specifically mentioned the jewelry given to James Hartwell, but also referenced other items placed with different people. "The sapphire necklace and emerald earrings that I have asked Mr. Hartwell to keep safe are not just jewelry. They represent my independence and my right to make my own choices. If anything happens to me, I want you to know that I chose to protect these pieces not because I feared they would be stolen, but because I feared they would be used to control the narrative of my life." William looked up at his aunt, his eyes filled with questions. "What does she mean about controlling the narrative?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "Your mother believed that if something happened to her, there would be attempts to minimize her impact and legacy. She wanted to ensure that future generations could see tangible reminders of who she was and what she stood for." The second letter was even more specific. Written just 3 weeks before Diana's death, it outlined her hopes for how her personal possessions should be handled. "I have learned that some within the institution hope that my influence will fade quickly after my death. They believe that time will diminish the public's memory of my work and my commitment to helping those who need help most. The jewelry I have placed in safekeeping is meant to serve as a reminder that some things should not be forgotten or buried away." William read the letter twice, understanding dawning on his face. His mother hadn't just been protecting valuable jewelry. She had been ensuring that future generations would have concrete reasons to remember her charitable legacy. "There's more," Sarah said, withdrawing a third document. "This is a legal memorandum your mother had prepared by her personal solicitor. It specifically states that her jewelry should be used for the benefit of charitable causes and individuals in need, rather than being absorbed into institutional collections where they serve no active purpose." The memorandum was signed and witnessed, making it a legally binding document that had never been shared with the royal family's legal team. William sat in stunned silence, processing the implications. His mother had anticipated exactly the kind of resistance the auction was now facing, and she had taken steps to ensure her wishes would be honored despite that resistance. "Why haven't you shown these letters before?" William asked. "Because I hoped they would never be necessary," Sarah replied sadly. "I thought the family would respect Diana's wishes without needing legal compulsion. But watching Queen Camilla try to pressure that poor Mrs. Hartwell, and seeing the palace machinery working to undermine your mother's final requests, I realized that Diana's fears were justified." Armed with this new evidence, William called an emergency meeting with his father that evening. Charles arrived at Kensington Palace looking haggard, the strain of the past weeks evident in his appearance. "Father, we need to end this conflict," William said without preamble. "But first you need to see something." He shared the letters and the legal memorandum with Charles, watching as his father's expression changed from confusion to understanding to something approaching shame. I never knew she had such specific concerns, Charles said quietly after reading everything twice. She never discussed these fears with me. Because she knew you wouldn't have understood them, William replied, not unkindly. She was protecting her legacy from the very forces that are trying to undermine it now. Charles set the documents aside and rubbed his temples. What do you want me to do, William? I can't simply overrule Camilla's concerns. Actually, you can. You're the king. But more importantly, you can choose to honor the wishes of someone who deserved better treatment than she received from this family. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Catherine, who had been alerted by William's private secretary about the evening's developments. She read the letters quickly, her expression growing more determined with each page. This changes everything, she said firmly. Diana specifically anticipated this kind of opposition and took legal steps to prevent it. We're not just honoring her memory anymore. We're following her explicit legal instructions. Charles looked between his son and daughter-in-law, seeing a united front that reminded him powerfully of his own parents' partnership. What about Camilla? She's genuinely distressed about this situation. Then she needs to understand that some things are more important than personal comfort, Catherine replied. Diana is asking us to help people from beyond the grave. How can we say no to that? Meanwhile, at Clarence House, Queen Camilla was dealing with her own crisis. The media coverage had intensified throughout the week, and much of it was unflattering. Columnists were questioning her motivations, and social media was filled with harsh criticisms of her opposition to the auction. Amanda Thornfield had spent the day managing a stream of negative press inquiries. The narrative was clearly shifting against Camilla, portraying her as someone who was threatened by her predecessor's memory and willing to harm a deserving widow to protect her own interests. Your Majesty, Amanda said during their evening briefing, I'm afraid the situation is becoming untenable. Public opinion is overwhelmingly against us, and several of our usual media allies are beginning to distance themselves from our position. Camilla stared out the window at the London traffic, feeling more isolated than she had in years. What are you recommending? A strategic retreat. Perhaps we could pivot to supporting the auction while emphasizing your own charitable work, show that you're above the fray and focused on positive contributions. It was sensible advice, but it felt like surrender to Camilla. After decades of building her position and reputation, being forced to back down by public pressure was deeply humiliating. Her contemplation was interrupted by a call from Charles, who requested her immediate presence at Buckingham Palace. The tone of his voice suggested urgency and perhaps something more. When she arrived, Charles was waiting in his private sitting room with the letters and legal documents spread out on a coffee table. His expression was grave as he gestured for her to sit beside him. My dear, he began, there have been some developments that change our understanding of this situation. As Camilla read through Diana's letters and the legal memorandum, Charles watched her carefully. He could see the exact moment when she realized that this wasn't just about William's sentimental attachment to his mother's memory. It was about legally binding instructions that Diana had specifically crafted to prevent exactly the kind of interference they had been attempting. She planned all of this, Camilla said quietly, setting down the final document. She knew exactly what would happen and took steps to prevent it. It appears so, Charles agreed. The question now is what we do with this knowledge. Camilla sat in silence for several minutes, processing the implications. Diana had outmaneuvered her from beyond the grave, anticipating her objections and neutralizing them with legal precision. It was simultaneously impressive and deeply frustrating. I suppose, she said finally, that fighting someone's legal wishes would make me look even worse than I already do. Charles took her hand gently. This doesn't have to be a defeat, my dear. It could be an opportunity to show grace and respect for the law, and look weak in the process, or look principled. Sometimes the strongest position is knowing when to step aside. As news of Diana's letters began to leak to the press, public opinion solidified completely in favor of the auction. Eleanor Hartwell found herself portrayed as a heroic figure standing up to royal pressure, while Camilla was increasingly depicted as someone who had tried to subvert a dead woman's charitable wishes. The stage was set for a final confrontation that would determine not just the fate of Diana's jewelry, but the future relationships within the royal family and Camilla's standing with the British public. The morning after the revelation of Diana's letters marked the beginning of the end of the royal family's internal battle. Queen Camilla woke early at Clarence house, having spent a sleepless night contemplating her options. The legal documents had changed everything. What had begun as a family disagreement had become a matter of law, and continuing to oppose the auction would cast her as someone willing to violate a dead woman's explicit wishes. At breakfast, she sat across from King Charles in their private dining room. The morning newspapers spread between them like evidence of a crime scene. The headlines were universally damaging. Diana's final victory. Queen Camilla defied dead princess's legal wishes, and royal family split over charity auction. The coverage will only get worse if I continue fighting this, Camilla said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. Diana has won this battle from beyond the grave, and I need to accept that gracefully. Charles reached across the table to take her hand. This doesn't diminish your position or your contributions. The public will respect you for respecting the law. Will they? Camilla asked with a wry smile. Or will they see this as proof that I was always threatened by her memory? The narrative writes itself. The jealous stepmother defeated by the beloved princess's final wishes. Despite her frustration, Camilla had always been a pragmatist. She understood that her best course of action now was to withdraw her opposition with dignity and find a way to turn the situation to her advantage, if possible. I want to make a public statement, she decided, not a retreat but a show of respect for Diana's charitable legacy and for the law. Amanda. Thornfield was summoned immediately to begin crafting a statement that would accomplish the seemingly impossible task of making Camilla's reversal look principled rather than defeated. The statement needed to acknowledge Diana's wishes while emphasizing Camilla's own commitment to charitable work. Meanwhile, William was dealing with his own challenges. The revelation of his mother's letters had vindicated his position completely, but it had also intensified media attention to an almost unbearable level. Eleanor Hartwell's cottage was now surrounded by reporters and photographers, forcing her to stay with relatives until the situation calmed down. Sarah Mitchell from Sotheby's called William that morning with concerning news. Your Highness, we're receiving inquiries from private collectors willing to pay extraordinary sums for the jewelry pieces. There's talk of bids reaching £5 million or more. This presented a new dilemma. While higher prices would mean more money for Eleanor and the charitable foundation, they would also attract the kind of wealthy collectors who might keep the pieces locked away in private vaults, defeating the spirit of Diana's wishes. Can we set conditions on the bidding? William asked. Require that winning bidders agree to occasional public displays or museum loans? It's unusual but possible. We could structure the sale with specific clauses about public access. William spent the morning consulting with legal advisors and charitable experts, crafting auction conditions that would honor both the letter and spirit of his mother's wishes. The jewelry would be sold, but the new owners would be required to make the pieces available for public viewing at least once per year and to loan them to museums upon request. At noon, Queen Camilla held a brief press conference in the garden of Clarence House. She stood behind a small podium, wearing a navy blue dress and the diamond brooch that had belonged to the Queen Mother. Her statement was carefully worded but unmistakably gracious. I have spent the past week expressing concerns about the auction of Princess Diana's jewelry, she began, her voice clear and steady. These concerns came from a place of wanting to protect the dignity of the royal family and ensure proper respect for precious items with deep historical significance. She paused, looking directly into the cameras. However, I have now learned that Princess Diana left specific legal instructions regarding these pieces, instructions that make her wishes absolutely clear. She wanted them to be used for charitable purposes, to help people who truly need assistance. The gathered reporters were silent, sensing the significance of the moment. As Queen, I have a duty to respect the law and to honor the charitable legacy of those who came before me. Princess Diana's commitment to helping others was one of her finest qualities, and I will not be the person who stands in the way of her final act of charity. She concluded by announcing that she would personally attend the auction to show her support for Eleanor Hartwell and the charitable foundation that would benefit from the proceeds. The statement was masterful in its execution. By framing her reversal as respect for the law rather than capitulation to pressure, Camilla managed to salvage some dignity from the situation. More importantly, by praising Diana's charitable legacy and promising to attend the auction. She positioned herself as a gracious supporter rather than a defeated opponent. The public reaction was surprisingly positive. Social media comments praised her for doing the right thing and putting charity above ego, while some cynics noted that she had little choice once the legal documents were revealed. The overall narrative shifted in her favor. William was both relieved and impressed by his stepmother's handling of the situation. He called her personally that afternoon to thank her for her gracious statement. "I know this wasn't easy for you," he said during their brief conversation. "I appreciate your support." "It was the right thing to do," Camilla replied simply. "Your mother's final wishes deserve to be respected, regardless of personal feelings." With the family conflict resolved, attention turned to preparing for what was already being called the auction of the century. Eleanor Hartwell was moved to a safe location for the remaining weeks before the sale, protected from the media frenzy by a team of security professionals provided by Sotheby's. The jewelry pieces were put on display for public viewing during the week before the auction. Thousands of people queued for hours to see Diana's sapphire necklace, emerald earrings, and pearl bracelet one final time. The exhibition was extended by 3 days to accommodate the overwhelming public interest. Among the visitors was a group of children from one of Diana's former patronages, a homeless shelter in London. They were given a private viewing, guided by William himself, who explained how their late patron had wanted her jewelry to continue helping people, even after she was gone. "She would have loved seeing you here," William told the children as they stood mesmerized by the sparkling jewels. "She always said that the most beautiful things in life were meant to be shared." The auction itself took place on a crisp November morning at Sotheby's London headquarters. The sales room was packed with bidders, journalists, and curious observers. Television cameras from around the world broadcast the event live, while online bidding platforms crashed repeatedly due to overwhelming traffic. Eleanor Hartwell sat in the front row, accompanied by Sarah Mitchell and flanked by security guards. Despite her age and the intense media attention, she appeared calm and dignified, occasionally nodding to acknowledge the extraordinary prices being bid for the jewelry pieces. Queen Camilla arrived precisely on time, accompanied by a small retinue but eschewing any grand entrance. She took a seat in the middle section, deliberately choosing not to bid but making her presence known as a sign of support for the process. The sapphire necklace was the star of the auction. Bidding opened at £1 million and quickly escalated as collectors, museums, and private investors competed for ownership. When the hammer finally fell, the winning bid was $4.2 million, paid by a consortium of British museums that planned to rotate the piece among their collections. The emerald earrings fetched $2.1 million, purchased by a private collector who had already signed agreements to loan them to exhibitions celebrating Diana's charitable legacy. The pearl bracelet, with its more modest provenance, still commanded $800,000 from a bidder who wished to remain anonymous. In total, the 3 pieces raised over $7 million for Eleanor Hartwell and the Diana Charitable Foundation. After auction fees and taxes, Eleanor would receive approximately $4 million, more money than she could ever spend, ensuring financial security for her remaining years and for her children and grandchildren. As the auction concluded, Eleanor was approached by William and Catherine, who had watched the proceedings from a private box above the main sales room. "Mrs. Hartwell," William said, taking her hands gently, "thank you for making this possible. My mother would be so proud to know that her jewelry is going to help so many people." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "It was the right thing to do, Your Highness. I just wish James were here to see it. He would be amazed at what became of those pieces he kept safe all those years." The success of the auction marked the end of one chapter in the story of Diana's jewelry, but it was also the beginning of something larger. The Diana Charitable Foundation, funded by the auction proceeds, would go on to support dozens of organizations working with homeless individuals, AIDS patients, and landmine victims, causes that had been close to Diana's heart during her lifetime. For the royal family, the resolution of the jewelry crisis had unexpected benefits. William's determination to honor his mother's wishes had enhanced his reputation as a principled future king, while Camilla's gracious handling of her defeat had actually improved her standing with the public. But the true measure of success would be seen in the years to come, as Diana's jewelry continued to serve the charitable purposes she had envisioned, helping people she would never meet but whose lives would be touched by her final act of generosity. 6 months after the auction that had captivated the world, the ripple effects of Diana's resurfaced jewelry continued to shape both the royal family and British society in unexpected ways. The story that had begun with Eleanor Hartwell's discovery of forgotten treasures had evolved into something far more significant, a testament to the enduring power of charitable legacy and the complex dynamics of modern monarchy. Eleanor Hartwell had transformed from a struggling widow into one of Britain's most celebrated philanthropists. With her newfound wealth, she had established her own charitable trust, the James and Eleanor Hartwell Foundation, which focused on supporting elderly individuals facing financial hardship. Her story had inspired thousands of people to donate to various causes, creating a wave of charitable giving that exceeded even the direct impact of the jewelry auction. She now lived comfortably in a beautiful cottage in the Cotswolds, purchased with a small fraction of her auction proceeds. The rest remained invested, generating income that she distributed to causes she cared about. Despite numerous media requests, she remained humble and focused on her charitable work rather than her sudden fame. Money doesn't change who you are inside, she told Sarah Mitchell during one of their regular tea meetings. It just gives you more options to do good in the world. That's what Princess Diana understood, and that's what she wanted these jewels to accomplish. The Diana Charitable Foundation had exceeded all expectations in its first year of operation. With over $6 million in funding, it had been able to restart several programs that had lost government support, provide emergency assistance to struggling families, and fund innovative research into the causes Diana had championed during her lifetime. William served as the foundation's patron, making regular visits to projects and personally reviewing funding applications. The work gave him a tangible way to continue his mother's legacy while using his royal platform to draw attention to important causes. During one particularly moving visit to a homeless shelter in Manchester, William met a young mother named Sarah who had received housing assistance from the foundation. As he listened to her story of escaping domestic violence and rebuilding her life, he was reminded powerfully of his mother's belief that everyone deserved dignity and support during their darkest moments. "Your mother's necklace helped save my family," Sarah told him, referring to the auction proceeds that had funded her housing assistance. "I never met her, but I feel like she reached out across time to help us." These were the moments that validated William's decision to proceed with the auction despite family opposition. The jewelry had been transformed from static symbols of privilege into dynamic tools for helping real people with real problems. The impact on the royal family's internal dynamics was equally significant, but more complex. Queen Camilla's gracious handling of her defeat had actually improved her public standing in ways that her years of charitable work had never quite achieved. By showing respect for Diana's wishes and supporting the auction, she had demonstrated a maturity and selflessness that many had doubted she possessed. Her relationship with William had been fundamentally changed by the conflict. Where once there had been polite but distant interactions, there was now a mutual respect born from having weathered a serious disagreement together. Camilla had learned that William would not be swayed by pressure when he believed he was acting correctly, while William had seen that his stepmother could put principle above personal interest when necessary. "I think we understand each other better now," Camilla confided to Charles one evening as they walked through the gardens at Highgrove. "William has his mother's determination, but he also has your sense of duty. That's a powerful combination." Charles had watched the entire crisis with a mixture of pride and concern. Pride in his son's principled stance and his wife's gracious response, but concern about the underlying tensions that had been exposed. The jewelry auction had resolved itself successfully, but it had also revealed how quickly family unity could fracture under pressure. He began holding monthly family meetings at Windsor Castle, informal gatherings designed to address potential conflicts before they escalated. The first few were awkward, with everyone carefully avoiding contentious topics, but gradually they became genuine opportunities for communication. Catherine had emerged from the crisis with enhanced respect from both the media and the public. Her quiet but firm support of William's position combined with her diplomatic handling of family tensions, had demonstrated the kind of steady leadership that would serve her well as future queen consort. She never put a foot wrong during the entire situation, observed Rebecca Thompson, the royal correspondent who had broken the initial story about Camilla's opposition. She managed to support her husband while remaining respectful to all parties. That's the mark of someone who understands her role perfectly. The media coverage of the jewelry story had also shifted public perceptions of the royal family in subtle but important ways. The conflict had humanized them, showing that they faced the same kinds of family disagreements as ordinary people, but it had also demonstrated their ability to resolve those disagreements with dignity and respect for higher principles. Diana's jewelry had found new homes that honored her memory while serving the public interest. The sapphire necklace rotated among 3 British museums, drawing record crowds wherever it appeared. Children who had never heard of Princess Diana learned about her charitable work while gazing at the beautiful jewels she had once worn. The emerald earrings appeared at special exhibitions celebrating women's contributions to charity and public service, inspiring a new generation of philanthropists. The pearl bracelet, despite being the least valuable piece, had perhaps the greatest symbolic impact. It was displayed at the Spencer family estate, Althorpe, alongside other mementos of Diana's life, helping visitors understand her as a person rather than just an icon. 1 year after the auction, William and Catherine attended a reception celebrating the first anniversary of the Diana Charitable Foundation. The event was held at Kensington Palace in the same rooms where Diana had once planned her own charitable initiatives. Among the guests were Eleanor Hartwell, now a beloved figure in philanthropic circles, Sarah Mitchell, who had become the foundation's honorary curator, and dozens of individuals whose lives had been changed by the foundation's work. As William looked around the room, he saw his mother's legacy living on in ways she could never have imagined. The jewelry that had once adorned her at royal events was now helping homeless families find housing, supporting AIDS research, and funding programs for landmine victims. She would have loved this, Catherine said quietly, standing beside him as they watched Eleanor Hartwell deep in conversation with a group of young charity workers. The jewelry or the party? William asked with a smile. All of it, but mostly the fact that her final gift is still giving, still helping people years after she's gone. Queen Camilla arrived at the reception fashionably late, wearing a simple but elegant dress and the diamond brooch that had belonged to the Queen Mother. Her presence at the event was noted by everyone present, a tangible symbol of the family, unity that had emerged from what could have been a devastating conflict. She spent considerable time talking with Eleanor Hartwell, and observers noted the genuine warmth between the 2 women who had once been on opposite sides of the jewelry dispute. Mrs. Hartwell was absolutely right to insist on the auction, Camilla was overheard saying to a group of guests. Princess Diana's wishes were clear, and the results speak for themselves. Sometimes the right choice isn't the easy choice, but it's still the right choice. As the evening progressed, William found himself reflecting on the unexpected journey that had brought them all to this point. What had begun as a discovery in an elderly widow's cottage had become a testament to the power of principled leadership and the importance of honoring the wishes of those who came before. The jewelry crisis had tested the royal family's unity, challenged their individual characters, and ultimately strengthened their ability to serve the public interest. Diana's final gift had been more than just beautiful jewels. It had been an opportunity for her family to demonstrate the values she had tried to instill in them during her lifetime. Standing in the palace where his mother had lived and worked, surrounded by people whose lives had been touched by her continuing generosity, William felt a deep sense of completion. The lost gems had truly found their way home, not to a vault or a collection, but to the ongoing work of helping others that had been Diana's true passion. The story of Diana's resurfaced jewelry would become part of royal family lore, referenced in biographies and documentaries for years to come. But its real significance lay not in the family drama it had generated, or the money it had raised, but in the lives it continued to touch through the charitable work it had made possible. Eleanor Hartwell, now in her 80s but still active in her philanthropic work, would often tell visitors that her greatest pride wasn't in discovering the jewelry or handling the media attention with grace, but in knowing that her decision to be honest had helped so many people she would never meet. That's what Princess Diana would have wanted, she would say, sitting in her comfortable sitting room surrounded by thank you letters from families the Foundation had helped. Not to be remembered for wearing beautiful jewelry, but for using that jewelry to make beautiful differences in people's lives. In the end, Diana's lost gems had done exactly what she had hoped. They had resurfaced not just as precious objects, but as instruments of ongoing charity, bringing her family together rather than driving them apart, and ensuring that her legacy of helping others would continue long after the drama of their discovery had faded from the headlines.